The first time home buyer can't get into the housing market. There's no way to do it. They feel shut out. How do we do this? How do we make it all work? There is a way. It's called the self-funding house.
We want to challenge and tackle the mindset of home buyers today to think differently about home ownership by thinking of their home as a business.
From our perspective, this is totally doable if you are the hopeful home owner and feel like you're shut out of the market. The first step is education and that shift of mindset saying it is possible.
But if all of a sudden you can do the simple thing, which is how do we increase the income of a home buyer, giving them the buying power to buy a house in today's market?
A hopeful home buyer here going, listen, I don't know, I can't get financing. How do I afford an average house price, let's say $750,000 if that's the number?
You know what? I'll give you the aha moment.
We have a vision.
I'm a firm believer that focus on the things you can control.
Creating financial future.
It's also a great way to tackle our housing crisis.
The possibility of dreaming bigger based on education. Rod Schulhauser, thanks for joining me today, talking about the self-funding house. I appreciate your time.
Great to be here, Patrick. I know we've got some exciting things to talk about, and always a pleasure to be chatting with you again.
So when we talk about the self-funding house, we look at what's going on in the world today and really in the world, but let's just talk about Canada and then we can even break it down provincially if we want. But the first time home buyer has a whole story that they can't get into the housing market. There's no way to do it. They feel shut out. If they don't have wealthy boomer parents, there's no gifting of down payments. How do we do this? How do we make it all work? You and Derek Lobo wrote a book and then went on to write a couple more, The Self-Funding House, which is all to say, if you're a first-time home buyer and are trying to get into the housing market for the first time, there is a way. It's called The Self-Funding House. Rod, give us an overview of what the Self-Funding House is all about.
Absolutely. And, it was targeted for exactly the person you described, that first time home buyer. And then a large part of them, Patrick, they've excused themselves from the market. They've relegated themselves to thinking that I'm not even thinking about buying a house because it's not like mom and dad when they bought their house at 2 or 3 times their income. It's 10 to 15 times today. So I know my salary isn't going to be increasing to make up that difference. And I doubt housing prices are going to come down to likewise make up that difference. So Derek and I wrote that book, and we wanted to challenge and tackle the mindset of home buyers today, particularly in today's market, and specifically to think differently about home ownership by thinking of their home as a business by becoming a landlord. And although not a new concept, I don't believe the mindset in the younger generations, and I know our staff and our children firsthand, don't have that thinking. They just excuse themselves and thinking they're not going to do it. But you know what? If all of a sudden you can do the simple thing, which is how do we increase the income of a home buyer? Because asking builders to reduce the cost, there just isn't that bandwidth. Construction costs and all those other elements, land costs, they're less controllable. But a person's income is perhaps a little more controllable if we can bolt on income for perhaps a rental suite, a backyard ADU, a basement apartment, and adding that to their income, giving them the buying power to buy a house in today's market.
Well, I love what you said around looking at your home and treating it like a business. That's a shift right away of mindset. Now, for a little additional context, I mean, you and I have literally educated, coached, worked with thousands of real estate investors. And what we know is that when that shift can occur, if we can support the hopeful home buyers in having a shift at looking at the property that they buy, to your point, as a business, as an investment, and start to shift that mindset, then we can see the opportunity. The reality of it is this, Rod, as you and I both know, it is very doable, but for most, it's an education factor. We're in the industry. We've watched thousands of real estate investors buy real estate, do a great job, follow a system. But if you're not in that game, if you're just that person that's working and hoping to buy a home one day, you don't necessarily understand what is possible because you're literally not in the industry. So in our from our perspective is this is totally doable if you are the hopeful home owner and feel like you're shut out of the market. The first step is education and that shift of mindset saying it is possible. One other, and I'm just going to go off on just one other little tangent. We use the term landlord, and many years ago within the real estate investment network, we started to use the term rental housing provider. And that term it's taken a long time, but I'm starting to hear more and more people using the term rental housing provider. And part of that is that it doesn't have such a negative connotation to it as being a landlord. And of course, that's what scares people who are uneducated. I don't want to be a landlord, tenants and toilets. I don't want anything to do with it. But the reality of it is that when you're educated, it isn't like that. So we can expand on that a little bit more, but I wanted to give it another layer of depth of context. So when you talk about treating it like a business, Rod, why don't we unpack that a little bit for somebody who's looking at it going, okay, you've got my attention. How would I treat it like a business? What does that even mean?
Yeah, and you know what? That's the golden question. If we think about it, if everybody had the entrepreneurial mindset and always had a willingness to learn, you and I wouldn't be talking about this. But the
Mm-hmm.
reality is, we have to understand and really take responsibility for providing a hand-holding journey, if you will, for that uneducated buyer. Remember, let alone uneducated buyer, uneducated in this new method of buying a self-funding house. So we're adding even deeper layers of the unknown. And so I would say
Mm-hmm.
the very first thing is just being that willing student. I often coin the phrase the first level of leadership in anything, life, business, whatever it is. But the first level of leadership is just being a willing student. And if we
Mm-hmm.
can realize that if we can provide education like what REIN does, then that is the first positive step, because they have to be educated on, first of all, the industry, home buying and everything associated with that. They have to be educated. Oh, what does it mean to own a business? Was that because there's positives to that, tax advantages and things like that, that maybe the layperson isn't fully aware of. And so I think that it's one thing to have an idea, but what I'm taking pride in and what we're doing with the self-funding house and working with collaborators like yourself and Rain is realizing that let's provide a journey that the home buyer doesn't have to go it alone. And
Mm-hmm.
more importantly, it isn't just the buyer we're talking about. We have to change the thinking of financial institutions. We have to change the thinking of developers and builders, because this is a different product with a different way of doing it. And it's also a great way to tackle our housing crisis.
Well, I think that, when we look at what's happening in the housing market, they call it a crisis because, literally, given the immigration, given the shortage, it is a bit of a crisis. We look at how much, to your point, is, a house is now, 10, 12, 15 times, income. And how do we get into the market? Yet understanding that this is the reality of what the market is. So we have to think differently. When we start looking at the problem and saying, well, how do we solve this issue? Then, of course, that's where innovation comes in. That's when a different way of thinking has to be engaged and start to shift. Now, when we kind of, enter this conversation, one of the things that we know is that for the less experienced home buyer or potential home buyer, is they're looking at the market, they're reading the headlines, and some of them are sitting on the sidelines waiting for, a big pullback in prices. And while we can't just speak nationally, we have to look at what's going on regionally in a housing market. What's happening, yes, in provincial Ontario, for example, but literally what's happening in Peterborough, what's happening in London or in Alberta, what's happening in Calgary versus Edmonton even. So those things change, but the foundational knowledge that we need doesn't. So a lot of people are sitting on the sidelines waiting for big price drops, and some are shut down because of interest rates. Now, let's start with a thought process around, we look at what interest rates are today. There's some hope that rates will come down significantly. I don't think that's going to happen in the next, well, certainly in 2024. I don't see it happening in a big way. I think we'll start to see some maybe come down. What's your view of what people need to understand around interest rates, Rod?
Well, it's one thing to pay attention to them, but I also don't think they're the panacea to solve your challenge.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a firm believer that focus on the things you can control. So if you can control your income more than you can control how much a builder costs and spends to build their product and the sell price they offer to you and I. So when it comes to interest rates, I think that number one, I agree with you. I think that maybe we've seen the top, but we've seen the top of the curve, but the
Mhm.
trajectory downwards, I'm not so sure will be as immediate as the rise we
Yeah.
encountered over the past 24 months. So
Yeah.
that being said, number one is I wouldn't wait on a big drop, number one. Number two is I would also, for just general information, I'm just talking concepts here, Patrick. Maybe the novice buyer is thinking, hey, that decline in interest rates is what I need to be able to afford a house. And the laws of dynamics and the history around real estate is the moment interest rates come down and the demand goes up for housing because of that, guess what builders have to do? They're building en masse, there's construction costs, and housing prices go up. And sure, there's a crossover those two curves, but to try and time that, I wouldn't risk, my personal money on it. Simple thought ends like this, Patrick, is that you would be far better off paying today's interest rate, right this very day that you and I are talking, for a shorter period of time. Yeah, it might be a higher rate than maybe a year from now, but I would take that higher interest rate at today's housing prices than the guess for what that same house would cost a year from today. Because I
Mhm.
know that sale price of that house, the impact of its incline has far larger impact on my mortgage payment than that interest rate adjustment. So that's just a word of advice, just in general. But again, I tend to land on foundations, meaning that I like to focus on what I can control. And that's what the self funding house concept's about. You can control your income this way by taking and embracing this concept, as opposed to, can I do something different in my career? Can I get a side hustle going? Will that work? Will that not work? Well, guess what? A self-funding house with a rental suite in the basement or out back, we know what rental demand is like, regardless of regionally and whatever. There's a huge demand in our country, and so that's the saving grace behind that income generation portion.
So let's start, let's give it a high level picture. I mean, when we look at what it takes to do this, because if we've got, a hopeful home buyer here going, listen, I don't know, I can't get financing. How do I afford an average house price? Let's say $750,000, if that's the number. But maybe it's 500, maybe it's 1.2, depending on where you're at. We have to look at all those things. But ultimately, what we're talking about right now is buying a end user home. So, in other words, you're going to buy a home. You're going to have what we refer to as an ADU, or an auxiliary dwelling unit. So, that could be a basement suite, it could be a coach home, it could be other doors. So, ultimately, you're going to live in the, let's say, main floor or even in the basement suite, and then rent out the other property. So, that at a high level, that is in fact the solution. Now, how would you expand on that in your explanation to give people that understanding?
Yeah, and you know what? I'll give you the aha moment. And this is the aha moment when we sit down and talk to banks about them changing their programs to make this program work, or we talk to collaborators like you, or we talk to home buyers, potential home buyers. The aha moment comes like this. I'll use that number, $750,000 average house price, but we all know it varies. Well, that average home cost, and using the recommendation of only one third of your income going towards your residence, that's what CMHC provides as guidance. And let's go with a 20% down, let's go with today's interest rates. That would require approximately $180,000 household income to afford the mortgage by yourself inside
Wow.
of that $750,000 home. That in
Yeah.
itself is the problem we face. I mean, that's
Yeah.
why people are frustrated with affordability. That's the problem. Put in that basement suite. We'll use the basement apartment just for clarity and simplicity of this conversation. You put in that basement suite. Let's just say it's a $1,500 a month rental, probably indicative of a secondary market here in Ontario where I live. That $1,500, if that $1,500 a month income, if it could be applied to your mortgage qualification, or if it's just applied to your household income, just for the sake of this example, all of a sudden $180,000 household income comes into a number probably a little less than
Mhm.
$120,000 a year of household income. Now, the savvy person, young guy, young gal, young couple, recognize that getting into the real estate market, do anything you can to get in because you know that it's only going to better your long-term financial scenario. And they
Mhm.
recognize, let's get our equity going. Why don't we live in that basement suite? Why don't we rent out upstairs for almost twice what probably the basement suite would be rented for? Well, $180,000 a year that became $120,000 a year comes down to a number just under $60,000 a year.
Wow.
And yes, I said that right, 60, $60,000 a year. So if I just put a period at the end of that sentence and say that is the one page mindset reset to understand that 180 can become 60 if you think differently about your house. And I think that, depending on which way you go, you can buy a house and renovate. You can buy, we're even doing this, Patrick, with new construction. And there,
Mhm.
there are some scenarios that we're working out where even that rental income can count towards mortgage qualifications. So there's a bunch of things that will change moving forward, but the concept remains the same. When you think of your home as a business, a different financial picture reveals itself.
Now, there's a next phase of that, which is, and I love that because that really changes the numbers quite dramatically. So hopefully we've got your attention. And then there's the next phase of that that we have to consider is that how is the bank going to look at that as a first time home buyer, for example? We're into that scenario and we're putting it in front of the bank and we're saying, this is what we want to do. And how does the bank look at that? And they're saying, oh, you're going to rent out a suite. Are they interested in that conversation?
Yeah, and if we were doing this 2 years ago, I'd say absolutely not, Patrick. Next question. But because of the last 2 years of the self-funding house, project we've been putting together, and we've sat down, Derek and I have sat down with the big people at the major banks, and we're having this conversation to the point where we've been working with some of them and actually doing some pilot projects and so forth. So let me now unpack what you've just asked, and that is, yes, they're starting to take notice because you got to remember the banks are a business too, and their mortgages that they're taking in as a product, let's say, today's ingestion rate of new mortgages is not the same as 3 years ago. So they too are struggling for quote business in that arena. So
Mhm.
I think that what we're seeing firsthand is, number one is, I want to be very clear here. That example I gave you was not for mortgage qualification. That was for household income to give you an idea of the impact. Banks still have their stress test processes and history and all those kinds of things that we can't talk, because that's, every individual has a unique story when it comes to those elements. But what I can tell you, I can tell you examples of where in new construction, because Derek and I being in the apartment development industry as well, we've got relationships in financial institutions, new construction development. So it's a very comfortable space for us to test out and succeed with pilot projects to be able to have a conversation like this with you. And so in that new construction project, one of our pilot projects, we were able to partner with a significant one of our major banks. And that major bank went in and they allow and will allow for this project that rental income to be applied to mortgage qualification. And that's where affordability happens. When that rental income can count towards mortgage qualification, it is a totally different picture for the buyer, because that's like getting a 20,000, 25,000, whatever a year raise. Well, that changes your buying power. That changes your financial position. So I'd end off with this, and that is, the financial institutions are starting to recognize there's a change. The housing
Mhm.
market isn't going to come back exactly to what it was a few years ago. And it's going to take creative solutions for the housing business, affordability, and for financial institutions if they want to continue, a very robust business for themselves as well. So we're seeing changes. We're not there yet, but we're definitely seeing changes.
Well, let's, when we talk about, dreams of home ownership, turning those dreams into realities, if we even want to dream a little bigger, and that is when we understand, and for those who are in and interested in buying their first property, they look around and they go, gosh, my parents, they only paid X for it and now it's worth Y. And all of a sudden they start to see that wealth creation and creating a financial secure or a financially certain future in by investing in real estate is a possibility. Now, what's interesting about this is that the banks do favor homeowners. So, in other words, investors, yeah, okay, you guys are a little risky, but a homeowner, Canada has a huge track record of people not defaulting. So they want to lend, they're willing, far more willing to lend to the end user. And if you're renting out that basement suite or that, whatever combination of things that you do, that's awesome. But here's the key. Let's dream even one step bigger. And I don't want to overwhelm anybody, but ultimately, at some point in the future, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 7 years, all of a sudden this property, you're in a better financial position because you put a plan together, you've maybe gained some equity, you've gained some education and some knowledge. And the next thing you know, the next property you buy, when you say, okay, well, no, I'm ready for a different, bigger home, I've got family now, whatever that might be, all of a sudden I'm going to figure out how to keep this house, use it as an investment property, and then go into my next home. So again, it's the possibility of dreaming bigger based on education. So I want to go back, and that the education component of it, Rod, is in fact a journey. It's not a switch you flip on and all of a sudden I'm going to go do this. It takes some time to learn what it is. And to what you said earlier, this is not about going it alone. This is not about being on the journey by yourself. This really is an opportunity within the self-funding house ecosystem to be surrounded by others who are on a similar journey with some guidance, with some support. And that's where a real estate investment network comes in. It's where self-funding house comes in. We have a very clear vision to support home ownership. So when you consider, all that's going on, and as we kind of wind this conversation down, we'll leave some links in the description below so that if you're interested in looking at this journey, what would it take? There's some links there that you can go in, get some free materials, get some insights into what some next steps might be. But Rod, what would be the wisdom that you would leave anybody listening to this conversation with? Any final words that you would want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to kind of springboard off of what you just spoke to, and that is, I believe one of the most important life skills, irrespective of the topic we're talking about, one of the most important life skills is financial literacy. You don't have to be a
Mm,
financial wizard. You don't have to be an accountant, a CPA, a CMA, but you need to be literate with finances. And yes, people in my generation have developed a lot of wealth just in their home, just because of what's transpired in that area. But within challenges like affordability right now, there's always opportunity. And that opportunity tends to be needing the literacy of finances. And so I would always say that the best life lessons are caused and developed when you make the choice to learn and learn
mm,
about whatever. We're talking about finances right here. And I would say that, like REIN, like what you're a part of here, Patrick, is that a lot of people, regardless of whether they pull a trigger on a self-funding house or not, there's so much to be learned that you will use throughout your entire life and that you can transfer over to your children or future children, that you should at least take that away from this conversation. But
mhm,
fundamentally, we know, and we're seeing firsthand through everything we've done to date, even at the beginning phases of what we're doing with the self-funding house, we're going to make a difference. We're going to make a difference in what we call a crisis right now. We're going to make a difference in positive change around what we're experiencing in our country. And more importantly, we're going to empower Canadians to take more control of themselves so that they can control things that they can control, as opposed to existing and reacting to things that are out of their control. So that's
mm.
probably my parting message, and hopefully it's global enough for people to realize that yes, when it comes to home ownership, we're talking specifically of the strategy that's working today that they can participate in. But like what you've said, Patrick, is we're thinking much bigger than that. We're thinking that even beyond just getting your foot in the door, there's a journey forward that you may want to learn about and pull that trigger when timing's right for you. Because, in our country, we know that real estate is a phenomenal platform for wealth
Mhm.
creation.
We have a vision, the self-funding house, the real estate investment network that is going to support first-time home buyers in creating financial futures because they have the opportunity to invest in real estate and buy their first home. And the mindset shift, the education shift, and I'll leave with this parting word for those who are looking at their first time. We often hear the phrase, I just want to buy my starter home. I just want to buy a starter home. And the implication of starter home is that there's going to be a next one. So when we look at our starter home, our first home, as an actual investment, we get far more strategic in our thought process when we have the education to say, oh, okay, this is where I'm starting. It is a journey. It's an educative journey, and it's understanding what the markets are doing. We look at a range of considerations in terms of the education. The good news is it's all been done before thousands of times. There is a system, there is a process, it is methodical, it is pragmatic, it is data driven, and it is, again, a step by step way of doing it. But learning the process is the most important. And the self funding house is one of your first steps in learning what it takes to execute on buying your first home. Rod, I want to say thanks so much for joining me on the show today. And we are going to initiate a change and live into the vision of supporting people buying their first home. Thanks for joining me.
Pleasure and thank you. I'm looking forward to make that dream come true, and it's going to be awesome.